On the record, it's a videotape deposition, Mr. Edward C. Ivey, being taken in Detroit, Michigan. It is Thursday, 14th of August, year 1997. Time is 3:44:02. Curious, please introduce themselves.
My name is Bob Kelley, and I'm here on behalf of the McGees.
John Uustal on behalf of the McGees.
Dan Gerber here on behalf of General Motors.
Would the court please swear in a witness?
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you are about to give will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do so swear.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ivey. Would you please state your full name for the members of the jury?
My name is Edward Charles Ivey.
And where are you employed, sir?
I'm employed with General Motors.
How long have you worked for General Motors?
Worked for General Motors since 1965.
What is your current position at General Motors?
I'm the Director of Chassis Engineering for the Small Car Group, which is a division of General Motors.
Is that a management level position?
Yes.
How long have you been in a management level position at General Motors?
Since 1983.
Okay. As I understand it, you went to General Motors Institute and graduated from there in 1969 with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering. Is that right?
I actually, the graduation would be 1970.
Okay. But other than that, you went to General Motors Institute and got a degree in Mechanical Engineering. And I believe you graduated in the top 10% of your class. Is that right?
Yes.
During your course at General Motors, did you have courses in statistics at General Motors Institute?
No, I did not. Oh, yes, no, I did have a course in statistics.
Yeah, I thought you did.
Yes, right.
And I've had the opportunity to look at some of the depositions that you've given in other cases, and I think you indicated you took a course entitled Statistics for Engineers. Is that right?
I don't remember the exact title, but I did have a class in statistics, yes.
Okay. Do you remember taking a class called Statistics for Engineers at General Motors Institute?
Asked and answered.
I don't remember the title of the class. I did have a... I'd have to look at my college transcript to get the exact title.
Let me show you a deposition transcript, see if this refreshes your recollection. This is the transcript of a deposition that you gave in a case called Burton versus General Motors, and it was given on September 18th, 1984. And if you just take a look at these two pages, I'll give you their pages 13 and 14 of the deposition. I believe it indicates that you had a class called Statistics for Engineers at the General Motors Institute. It's down at the bottom.
Yes, that's what it says here, but it also says I don't recall the title of the class. So.
Okay. I know that 1984 is a lot closer to when you took the class than 1997, so is that probably a fair approximation as to what the name of the class was, Statistics for Engineers?
Probably.
All right. Now, in addition to getting your bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and by the way, was that a subspecialty in automotive engineering?
Yes, it was.
In addition to getting that degree, you also have a master's degree in mechanical engineering. Is that right?
Yes.
Was that also automotive engineering, the mechanical engineering degree?
No, it was. There wasn't a specialty in graduate school.
You got that degree at Michigan State?
No, at the University of Michigan.
University of Michigan. And you were on a fellowship from General Motors at that time, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And as I understand it, you began working for General Motors full-time as a project engineer in the summer of 1970. Is that right?
That's correct.
And at that time, you went to work in the Oldsmobile division.
Yes.
And you continued to work in the product engineering section of Oldsmobile for a number of years.
Until that department was dissolved in the reorganization of 1983.
Okay. So from 1970 until 1983, you worked in the product engineering department of Oldsmobile.
Yes.
And during the time that you have worked for General Motors, you have participated in value analysis seminars that were sponsored by General Motors. Is that right?
Section leading.
One, possibly two, I don't remember.
Okay. In order to, I think I'm entitled to ask this fellow leading questions given the nature of his relationship to this case, but just to cure the objection in case there is a problem with that. Did you, during the course of your tenure at Oldsmobile in the product engineering department, attend seminars on value analysis that were sponsored by General Motors?
I can remember at least one. There may have been more than one.
Okay. And during your employment at General Motors in the product engineering department of Oldsmobile, did you, at the request of General Motors, do a value analysis of certain products at the request of General Motors?
Objection vague and ambiguous.
Let me rephrase it. During the time that you worked at General Motors, have you ever done a value analysis of certain types of products for General Motors?
In connection with the training that I had, yes, I did projects in connection with that training.
All right. Now, as I understand it, in the summer of 1982, you became a project engineer in advanced design. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the advanced design department was a department of the product engineering section of Oldsmobile.
That's correct.
And at that time, your supervisor was a fellow by the name of Mr. Jack Wallace. Is that right?
That's correct.
And Mr. Wallace's supervisor was Mr. Ralph Perkins. Is that right?
That's correct.
And during the time that you were in the advanced design department, you were working on, or you did some work on a fuel system analysis. Is that right?
I worked on a project related to fuel tank locations, yes.
Fuel tank locations?
Yes.
And you did that during the time that you were, that Mr. Wallace was your supervisor, correct?
Yes.
And at the time you did that analysis on fuel tank locations, I believe that Oldsmobile was the lead division of General Motors with respect to fuel systems in project center cars like the A car. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And in the year 1973, was one of your functions in the product engineering department to investigate different projects at the request of management?
Yes. Yes, what we had in the advanced design group, we'd be assigned projects to work on.
All right. Now, we have here an extremely difficult to read, but nevertheless, if you have good eyes or a magnifying glass, an organizational chart, which General Motors has been kind enough to provide us with here this morning.
You can mark it on the back.
I got room up here on the top here, which I'd like to have marked as Exhibit 1. And of course, you've seen this before.
Yes.
This organizational chart. And this is dated January 1st of 1973, correct?
I would have to look.
The date is actually cut off, but Mr. Gerber advised us before the deposition.
Yeah,
It's January 1st.
it has January 1st right down here.
1973?
Right.
And does that show, does that organizational chart accurately show the hierarchy of the employment levels in the product engineering department of Oldsmobile as of that date?
I believe it does.
And are you shown on there?
Yes.
And could you, if you could, I know it's going to be extremely difficult to see with the video camera, but I'd like for you to turn it around if we can. I've highlighted the boxes. At least the jury should be able to see the boxes from there, and you can maybe tell us the names of the different people that are in there. You need to hold up a little more directly, a little more vertically so the cameraman can focus in on it. There we go. Okay, now I'll kind of do the pointing. If you can, you look over my shoulder and we'll kind of explain who is where. Down here in this yellow box is your name, Mr. E.C. Ivey. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you were, what does it say, a project engineer?
I was a project engineer.
I can't read that from here. That's what it says. And you would have, and this is the advanced design department, correct?
Correct.
And you would have reported directly to Mr. Wallace.
That's correct.
And you can see the black line leading right up to Jack Wallace. And then Mr. Wallace would have reported directly to Mr. Perkins. Is that right?
That's correct.
Could you tell me, because I can't read it from here, what was Mr. Wallace's title and what was Mr. Perkins' title, if you can read it?
Mr. Wallace's title is Assistant Advanced Design Engineer, and Mr. Perkins' title is Advanced Design Engineer.
All right. Now let's turn it back around so the jury can see it. Who would have been the top person in the advanced design department in 1973?
Mr. Perkins.
Mr. Perkins, and so that's this level right here.
Yes.
And then Mr. Perkins, if we follow the lines of authority, would have reported directly to Mr. Ball, is that right?
That's correct.
And your fingers covering the top dog there at that time was a fellow by the name of Mr. Dorshimer.
That's correct.
Is that right? What was Mr. Ball's position and Mr. Dorshimer's position in this time frame?
Mr. Ball was an assistant chief engineer, and Mr. Dorshimer was the chief engineer.
Okay, turn it back around for a second. In addition to that, and I want to just cover the whole chart at one time with as many names as we can here, there is another name that I've highlighted over here, Mr. Stemple, what was his position at that time?
He was also an assistant chief engineer.
He would have reported directly to Mr. Dorshimer?
That's correct.
He would have been at the same level as Mr. Ball?
Yes.
All right. And under Mr. Stemple, if we follow the names down there, there was a fellow by the name of Mr. Freiberg, and if we continue to follow those lines down, we get to Paul Muddy. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
What was Mr. Freiberg's position?
He was the powertrain engineer.
And Mr. Muddy was under him?
Yes.
And Mr. Muddy's title on the chart was what?
He was a senior project engineer.
All right. A couple of other names I want to cover here while we've got it out is over here on the left, which would be to the left side of your department, the Advanced Design Department, was a Mr. Jack Ridenauer, correct?
Yes.
What was his title at that time?
He was the Automotive Safety and Information Services Assistant Staff Engineer.
All right. And then the other fellow I just want to identify in the chart is a man by the name of Mike Barcelo, and he would have been over here on the far left-hand side of the chart. What was his position at the time?
He was a project engineer.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's all we need for the chart for right now. Let me make sure in a minute. Now, in 1973, did you participate in a survey of crashed cars in junkyards with Paul Muddy and Jack Ridenauer?
Yes, I did.
What is that study known as?
Seems facts not in evidence.
I don't know that it's known as anything. It's been called the Junkyard Survey.
Have you heard it referred to as the Muddy Junkyard Study?
No, not in that light.
The Junkyard Study?
Junkyard Survey, that's the way I know it as.
All right, we'll call it the Junkyard Survey today. In any event, you did this survey, this Junkyard Survey in 1973 with Mr. Paul Muddy and Mr. Jack Ridenauer, right?
Correct.
And you were instructed to, or you were given the assignment to do this project by Mr. Wallace, who was your direct supervisor at the time.
Yes.
Well, who gave you the instruction to do the
Mr. Wallace.
Who gave you the assignment? Mr. Wallace.
Yeah.
And if you could, I want to hold the chart back up just for a moment so the jury can see the different levels of people that were involved in this project. It would be you were down here in advanced engineering, correct?
Yes.
And then over here laterally to you was Mr. Ridenauer, who was the safety engineer.
Yes.
And then up here was Mr. Paul Muddy, who at that time was the fuel systems coordinator for Oldsmobile, correct?
Yes. I don't know his exact function. He was responsible for the fuel system.
But you all were really coming from 3 different departments of product engineering to do this junkyard survey.
Yes.
And you were asked to participate in it by Mr. Wallace, who was your direct supervisor.
Yes.
Do you know who it was that came up with the idea to do the survey, the junkyard survey?
No, I do not.
Now, are you aware that at the time that Mr. Muddy was involved in this survey with you, he was the fuel systems coordinator for Oldsmobile?
Asked and answered.
I don't know that I knew exactly what his total function was, except that he was responsible. He was the responsible engineer for fuel systems.
Okay. Was that his title, fuel systems coordinator?
Asked and answered.
I don't know.
Was he the release engineer for fuel systems at Oldsmobile at that time?
Yes, he was.
All right. And at that time, Mr. Muddy was also the development engineer for the fuel system in the A-body vehicles. Is that right?
A release engineer in the normal way that we worked is a development engineer also.
All right.
And I don't know how many fuel systems Mr. Muddy was responsible for at the time.
Okay, fair enough. And at the time that you all were doing this junkyard survey, Mr. Ridenauer was the automotive safety engineer.
Leading. Asked and answered.
His title was something like that. I don't remember exactly what we stated here.
You want to go?
Basically, safety engineering was part of his responsibility, yes.
So this project brought together a safety engineer, the fuel systems release engineer, and an advanced design engineer. Is that right?
Leading and cumulative.
Yes.
Okay. Now, later on, you were transferred out of the advanced design department, and you worked in other departments of Oldsmobile product engineering. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I have another chart here. This has been marked, might as well mark it again here with your sticker on it today. We'll mark this as Exhibit 2 to your deposition. Take a look at this. This chart is dated, it's a lot easier to read, it's dated August 1st of 1975. And does this chart show where you were working? It's up here in the top right-hand corner, as of August 1st of 1975.
Yes, it does.
What was your title at that time?
I was a senior project engineer.
And were you a senior project engineer in the same department as Larry Filer at that time?
Yes.
And are you aware that at that time, as of August of 1975, Mr. Filer had taken over for Mr. Muddy as the fuel systems coordinator for Oldsmobile?
I don't know that I recall what his job was at that time.
All right. Do you know that at that time, as of August of 1975, when you were working with Mr. Filer, that he was the release engineer for the 1978 A-body vehicle?
I don't recall.
You don't recall one way or the other?
No.
Okay. Okay. Now, on the two organizational charts that we have in front of you, we've located Mr. Muddy, we've located Mr. Ridenauer, we've located Mr. Filer, Mr. Barcelo, but we haven't located a fellow by the name of Jim Steger. Do you know who he was, first of all?
I don't recall the name at all.
You don't recall Mr. Jim Steger?
No.
Okay, don't recall ever meeting him? How about Mr. Frank Winchell? Do you know him?
I know who he was.
Who was Mr. Winchell?
He was a corporate executive in down at the tech center at the time. Might even have been a vice president. I don't know his exact title.
Okay, the tech center, just so the jury knows, was located in Warren, Michigan?
Yes.
And that was also the project center for the project cars like the A-car?
Leading.
The project centers, most of them were located at the in the tech center at Warren. Yes.
In Warren, okay.
Yeah.
Do you know Mr. Paul Johnson?
Let me ask a clarifying question. You're asking, do you know? Are you asking, does he know? Like, do you know who President Clinton is, or are you asking, do you personally know?
We can follow, like Mr. Frank Winchell. Do you personally know Mr. Winchell?
No, I do
You
not.
just know who he is. How about,
I know who he was at the time. Right?
Okay, how about Paul Johnson? Do you know who he is or was?
During the course of my career, I've met Mr. Johnson. I don't know what he did back in 1973, and I don't know what he does now.
Are you aware of any work that he did in fuel systems?
Not at all.
Okay. How about Mr. Ron Elwell? Do you know him?
No, I don't know.
Have you ever met him?
No, I haven't.
Have you ever had any discussions of any kind with Mr. Elwell?
No, I have not.
All right. How about Mr. Frank Allen? Do you know him?
No, not at all.
Have you ever met Mr. Frank Allen?
Not that I can recall.
All right. Obviously, you know Mr. Dorshimer. We identified him.
Yes, I know.
And Mr. Frank Ball.
Yes.
All right. Now, when Mr. Wallace gave you the assignment to do the junkyard survey in 1973, was he your direct supervisor at that time? When he gave you the assignment?
Yeah.
Fact, not in evidence.
Yes, Mr. Wallace was my direct supervisor.
All right. And that study was done during the summer of 1973. Is that right?
I can't recall exactly. It was the spring and summer, that time frame. I don't know. I don't remember the exact dates.
Well, let me try and refresh your recollection if I can. Again, I'm going to refer to the same deposition that we talked about earlier. On page 46, line 9 of that deposition. You can just take a look at it. It's pretty clear there. First of all, just take a look at it and see if it refreshes your recollection. If it does, that'll be fine. If not, I'll ask you about it.
No, I stated it was the summer of '73. I don't remember the exact dates. It was prior to when I left the department. I do remember it was warm when we were out in the junkyards. That's
All right.
the best I can recall.
Okay, again, I'm referring to a deposition now. This deposition was taken back in September of 1984, which would have been a lot closer in time to the event than here we are 13 years later. Would your recollection probably have been better back then as to when this project actually took place?
Well, since this deposition was, still 10 years after, I don't know that my recollection would have really been any better.
All right, well, let me ask you, did the project take place in the summer of 1973?
Asked and answered. Repetitive.
Like I said, it could have. It was warm. It was certainly the spring or summer. It wasn't the winter of '72 or '73. It was. I left the department on the 1st of July. It happened prior to that.
Okay. Do you recall giving testimony under oath in the case of Burton versus General Motors Corporation, sir?
Yes, I do.
Were you sworn to tell the truth at that time?
Yes, I was.
And did you tell the truth?
Yes, I did.
And do you remember at that time you were asked this question and you gave this answer? What was the time frame of this investigation that you did with Mr. Jack Ridenauer? Answer, it was in the summer of 1973.
Objection. It's
That was the best I remembered when I gave that deposition.
Okay. Were you telling the truth at that time?
Yes.
Okay. So to the best of your recollection, sir, you did this junkyard survey sometime during the summer of 1973, correct?
objection. Asked and answered. Repetitive.
All I've stated,
badgering.
back then I stated it was the summer of '73. That's what I remember then. At this time and date, what I remember today is that I know it was warm. It wasn't raining or anything. It was warm weather. That could be the spring or the summer.
And this survey that you did with Mr. Muddy and Mr. Ridenauer took you approximately 4 to 6 weeks to do. Is that right?
Leading.
I don't remember how long we spent on the project.
All right. Do you remember giving testimony in the case of Jam Pole versus General Motors on March 5th, 1986, sir?
I remember, I don't remember the exact case, but I do remember the Jan Pole name, yes.
Okay. Let me take a minute and refer your refer you to page 24, line 2. It's the top of this deposition. And you were asked at that time, how long did you work on that particular project? Go ahead and take a moment and look at it and see if that refreshes your recollection as to how long you were on that project.
I stated here, I believe it was in the 4 to 6 weeks time frame.
All right. Does that help refresh your recollection as to approximately how long it took you to do this junkyard survey with Mr. Muddy and Mr. Ridenauer?
I wouldn't disagree with what I stated before, but
So-
today I don't remember exactly how long it took.
Okay. But you would not disagree that it was probably in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 weeks?
Asked and answered.
Like I said, right this moment I don't remember. That's what I stated back in 1985, I
86.
think, 86. Right?
Now, when the study was performed, as we established earlier, it was done with 3 people, and you were kind of the independent person in that project. Is that right?
Leading.
Well, that's correct.
And why would you characterize yourself as the independent person in that particular junkyard survey?
When I was given the assignment, I was asked to be a third person that didn't have an opinion on fuel tank location.
Okay, at the time you started this survey, you had absolutely no opinions whatsoever on fuel tank location.
That's correct.
So you were independent.
Yes.
And this study was performed, as I understand it, by you and Mr. Muddy and Mr. Ridenauer going to junkyards, for lack of a better term, and looking at cars that had been involved in crashes. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you all would look at the fuel systems in these cars that had been wrecked and hypothesize how perhaps the fuel system would have performed differently if the fuel tank had been in a different location.
Leading.
Is that correct?
Basically, we looked at rear-end collisions, all the cars that we could find that had rear-end collisions, and we made assumptions on how the fuel systems would perform based on whether they were located over the axle or under the floor of the trunk. So we looked at the crashes, and we hypothesized the performance of the fuel systems in these crashes on these two fuel tank locations that were under consideration.
All right. And what was the purpose of your hypothesizing how these fuel systems would have performed had they been different, or had they been located in different locations?
We were trying to form an opinion of the best location for the fuel system for the design of passenger cars.
Future cars?
Yes.
And at that time, you were specifically interested in the location of the fuel tank, is that right?
That's correct.
Now, when this study was being performed, I'm sure you remember it was warm. I'm sure it wasn't very comfortable probing around these junkyards. And as I understand it, you would be taking Polaroid photographs of some of these cars, is that right?
That's correct.
And you would make notes on the photographs?
That's correct.
About what had happened?
That is correct.
And did you, at the end of your study, come to conclusions as to whether a particular fuel tank location might have been safer than another fuel tank location, just in general?
Yes, we did.
So you would agree with the general proposition, and I'm not asking you to commit to any particular location, but just agree with the general proposition that, in general, some fuel tank locations in cars are safer than others.
Vague and overbroad.
I don't know that we were looking at it from a what I would describe as a safety viewpoint. We were looking at the best place for a fuel tank from a overall performance of the fuel system in crash and related to crashes, and that could be considered safety, but it was we were trying to come up with the best position to put the fuel tank from a crash performance.
And when you talk about crash performance, that's the ability of the vehicle to perform well in a crash.
That's correct.
And when you're talking about performance, we're talking about we don't want there to be a fuel-fed fire if it can be avoided, correct?
Leading.
That's correct.
And that's what you were looking at that summer, right?
Yes.
Because at that time there were several lawsuits pending against General Motors arising out of fuel-fed fires.
Leading.
Correct.
That's not an evidence, lack of predicate.
As a result of this study, I was aware of litigation against General Motors in that area. That was not the stated purpose for what we were doing the study on.
Well, whether it was the stated purpose or not, at the time you were doing the study, you were aware that there were pending lawsuits against General Motors arising out of fuel-fed fires, correct?
Leading, lack of predicate.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. You can have a standing objection to leading. You don't have to make that objection because I'm convinced I can ask this man leading questions, so you don't need to do that. You have a standing objection for the rest of the deposition. The purpose, whether it be stated or unstated, was an attempt to find out if there were some locations that fuel tanks could be put in cars where there would be less likely for there to be a fuel-fed fire as a result of an accident. Is that correct?
Can I have that read back, please?
No, you can't have it read back.
No, I want to listen. I couldn't understand it.
Okay. Well, in general, you're not entitled to have things read back, but...
You want to restate the question?
Sure. She can read it back. No, go ahead.
The purpose, whether it be stated or unstated, was an attempt to find out if there were some locations that fuel tanks could be put in cars where there would be less likely for there to be a fuel-fed fire as a result of an accident. Is that correct?
Do you understand that?
Yes, I think I do.
Okay.
And the basic answer is yes.
Okay. Now, after you concluded this junkyard survey, you gave a presentation to Mr. Dorshimer and Mr. Ball in the engineering conference room, correct?
That's correct.
Where was that engineering conference room located?
It's located at the Oldsmobile Engineering Building in Lansing.
In Lansing, okay. And you were the person who actually made the presentation to Mr. Dorshimer and Mr. Ball at that time.
That's correct.
Mr. Muddy and Mr. Ridenauer were there, but you were the person who made the presentation.
That's correct.
And I'm just curious as to why you made the presentation to Mr. Dorshimer and Mr. Ball, who are the two fellows at the very top of this organizational chart marked as Exhibit 1, when you were given the assignment by Mr. Wallace, who was your direct supervisor. Do you know why that was? That you reported directly to the top management in product engineering?
No, I didn't set up the meeting.
Who set up the meeting?
I don't remember.
All right. In any event, even though you got the assignment from Mr. Wallace, you did not give the report to him, correct?
That's correct.
You got the assignment from Mr. Wallace and gave the report directly to Mr. Dorshimer and Mr. Ball, right?
That's correct.
Do you know why they were interested, Mr. Dorshimer and Mr. Ball, in the results of your junkyard survey?
Speculation.
No, I don't know. We were asked to give a report, and we did.
Okay. And as far as you were concerned, in your mind, you were through with that particular project once you had made the presentation to Mr. Dorshimer and Mr. Ball. Is that right? In other words, your work on that project was completed.
I believe so, as best I can recall.
Now, in addition to this junkyard survey, you were working on another project at the request of management in 1973, weren't you?
Vague and ambiguous.
I worked on several projects, yes.
Okay. The other project that I'm speaking about at this particular point in time was an analysis of the fuel-fed fire litigation that was pending against General Motors at that time.
Yes, I did that, yes.
Okay. And the nature of your assignment was to look at the pending lawsuits against General Motors, correct?
My assignment was to look at the information from those lawsuits relative to see if they would have any bearing on the fuel tank location.
All right. And you did this lawsuit analysis at the request of your boss in order to look and see if there was anything that, as you just said, would relate to future designs of fuel tanks that you could learn from the pending litigation.
I guess that the answer to that would be